Welcome to a special edition of the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. It is Selection Sunday in college basketball. After not having a tournament last year, we will have an NCAA tournament this year. Kevin Rogers with you. Hope you're having a good Sunday. And the brackets getting unveiled. And it took an extra few minutes because Ohio State and Illinois ended up going to overtime, and Illinois won the Big Ten title. So now we have just about all of the seeds out there and who they're playing, so that's good. And as you see on the bottom line, the scroll with the automatic bids for the NCAA tournament. And let us begin by looking at the West Regional. And as you see here on the screen on VegasInsider.com, Gonzaga at 26-0. They are the number one seed in the West. And Oklahoma and Missouri, 8-9 inside of that bracket. And Oklahoma, who did not play very well to close out the season, they needed to... They really... well, first off with Oklahoma, let's talk about them. That's a team that really struggled towards the end of the season. And I believe it was an 0-5 or 0-6 ATS run towards the end. And they unfortunately could not make it into the Big 12 championship. And they end up losing to Kansas in the second game. They barely got past Iowa State in the first game. And now they face off with Missouri coming up in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So a couple former Big 12, or I should say Big 8 rivals, and then into the Big 12 for a little bit with Missouri. And Oklahoma, I'll be curious to see who's favored in that game, because Missouri right now at 16-9, they gave Alabama a lot of fits in the SEC tournament. And Missouri had to come back to beat Georgia in the first game. So Oklahoma and Missouri in the opener in that 8-9. They'll face Gonzaga, likely, we're assuming. I mean, Gonzaga faces the winner of Appalachian State and Norfolk State in the first round. So after that, 5-12, Creighton and UCSB. Creighton, who the Blue Jays were blown out in the Big East championship by Georgetown. And they face UCSB, who won the Big West title. So that'll be interesting. And Virginia gets Ohio in the 4-13 matchup. And Ohio won the MAC. It's a pretty good team. Virginia's very curious that Virginia, remember they had to bow out of the ACC tournament because of COVID issues. So they still got a 4 seed, even though they didn't win the ACC championship. And now we'll see how Virginia will fare. Remember, this is the first time Virginia's playing. They're the defending national champions, Virginia. So they won the championship 2 years ago. 3 years ago is when they got bounced by UMBC in the opening round as the number 1 seed. And now they face Ohio as a 4 seed. So Virginia, Ohio winner gets Creighton, UCSB winner. In the 6-11, it's USC, and they are waiting for the winner of Wichita State and Drake, which is going to be a fantastic game. That's coming up on Thursday night. Because remember remember on Thursday night, you have the first 4. It's not Tuesday and Wednesday. The tournament starts Friday, not Thursday. So Wichita State and Drake, that is the opener, or at least one of the games being played on Thursday. But that's a really good game. And Wichita State, they fell short in the American after getting the number 1 seed. They fell short, and they lose to Cincinnati in their second game. They didn't play well against USF in the first game, and now they get Drake. And Drake did not win the Missouri Valley title. That was Loyola Chicago. But that Drake team is still pretty formidable. Kansas and Eastern Washington, that is the 3:14 game in the West. And Kansas, who also had COVID issues like Virginia did, they don't win the Big 12 title. That went to Texas. But Kansas still, that's crazy, a 3 seed, considering they had their struggles in January. And they face Eastern Washington, who won the Big Sky title. And Eastern Washington at 16-7 on the season. Oregon and VCU, that's very intriguing, the 7-10 matchup. Both these teams lost their conference championships. Oregon lost to Oregon State, and VCU lost to St. Bonaventure in the Atlantic 10. But Oregon's still playing very well, at least down the stretch. Iowa and Grand Canyon is the 2:15 game. And Iowa, who fell short in the Big Ten tournament, still a very good team. I mean, the Big Ten got a lot of high seeds because Illinois was the 1 in the Midwest. You had Ohio State, we'll get to, as a 2 in the South, Iowa as a 2, Michigan. So you had a lot of Big Ten teams that did really, really well with seedings. And they got Grand Canyon, and Bryce Drew is the coach at Grand Canyon. Remember him? Of course, March Madness star for Valparaiso. He was a coach at Valparaiso, and then he went to Vanderbilt, and then he took over for Dan Marley at Grand Canyon out in Arizona, and he ended up winning that the WAC championship. So now they face Iowa in the opening round. So with all that being said, we'll get to the South, and we'll get to the other regionals in a second. Let's bring on our friend Thom Cunningham, VegasInsider.com, our college basketball guru, I guess we can call him that. And Tom, first off, a very exciting time of the year for you, I know especially, but what thoughts did you have, at least, let's start with the West region, and what are your initial thoughts on what you saw unveiled there?
Yeah, I think Missouri, I initially had as a 7 seed, and I was contemplating moving them down just based off their recent struggles going into the SEC tournament. And then they won a game.
And then we'll hang on one sec, Tom. We'll bring you up. And you are ready to rock and roll, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Here, hold on. We'll fix your audio in just one second. You know what? I should go like that. You know what? That's on me, my friend. You go now, Thom Cunningham.
In the West, Missouri, I was a bit surprised at a 9 seed. I figured that they would get the 7 seed there because of the 1 win they had in the SEC tournament. I figured that would be enough to keep them even above the 8-9 seed mark, but I guess the recent struggles to end the season did not work out that well. So they're going to be 9 seeded with Oklahoma in round 1, and if they win, they have to play Gonzaga. So I would say in the West region, Missouri, they really got a short end of the stick.
Yeah, and what do you think about that Oklahoma-Missouri matchup?
Yeah, I think it'll be a good one. You have 2 teams that are struggling, essentially, entering this tournament. Overall, I do think Oklahoma is slightly better. They have a little bit more talent. I think Austin Reeves is the best player in that game. But you have Drew Smith, a good story, and Mark Smith from Missouri. They have a good big man in Jeremiah Tillman. And then, of course, they have Xavier Pinson kind of running the show. It should be an intriguing match.
Yeah, we'll get Tom back up in 1 second, and we'll take care of his audio in just 1 second. But the this West region, first of all, we'll hook up Tom in just 1 second. The West region, Gonzaga's the favorite, and Virginia has got to be one team to look at. I mean, look how strong these top teams are in the West. Gonzaga, Iowa, Kansas, Virginia. All right, so you have 4 really strong teams. USC is very good. Even Creighton, who had a bit of a slump towards the end of the season. But you had all of that. So that West Regional is pretty good. Now let's look at the South. And in the South, Baylor right now is the number one seed, and they face Hartford, and Baylor should roll past Hartford in that opening game. North Carolina, Wisconsin. Man, when you talk about intrigue, North Carolina, who lost to Florida State in the ACC championship, and Wisconsin, who just was so up and down. They had a really good start to the season, and then towards the end, it just wasn't strong. So you wonder which Wisconsin team you're going to get in that first game against North Carolina. That's where you're really got to be curious about how that one's going to turn out. Villanova and Winthrop. Winthrop went 23-1 this season, and Villanova, who lost their big guard Colin Gillespie, they lose in the opener of the Big East tournament to Georgetown. So they fall to a 5. Villanova was talked about to be maybe, not about maybe a 1, but probably a 2. They had some COVID issues. They had some bad losses along the way. So Villanova is a team that I'm not sure if a 5, if you're going to see them make a run because they're going to be undervalued, or is Villanova going to be one and done? And without Gillespie, that's big because the last 2 games they played without him, they lost to Providence and they lost to Georgetown. And Georgetown went on a huge run in the Big East tournament. So maybe Villanova's ripe for an upset here against Winthrop. The 4-13 game is Purdue and North Texas. And Purdue played well towards the end of the season. They get North Texas, who is a real grinded-out team out of Conference USA. They beat Louisiana Tech in a low-scoring game. They beat Western Kentucky in overtime. They were up 17-0 in that game against Western Kentucky in the Conference USA Championship. And now they get Purdue, and Purdue will be favored in that game, but I wouldn't sleep on North Texas necessarily. North Texas also played some decent teams out of conference, so I would say North Texas possibly would be a team to keep an eye on. Texas Tech faces off with Utah State. And Utah State did not win the Mountain West. It was San Diego State. So Utah State to be an at-large out of the Mountain West is pretty big. And Texas Tech at 17-10. Chris Beard's team, they're tournament tested, but we'll see how, if there's maybe an upset there in that 6-11 game. Arkansas and Colgate. Arkansas is the 3 seed. They were on fire for the last 2 months in the SEC. Colgate 14-1 out of the Patriot League. Only 15 games. But Arkansas, they have been terrific so far this season. Florida and Virginia Tech. Florida 14-9 and Virginia Tech at 15-6 so far. And Virginia Tech had COVID issues. They missed a lot of time. So did Florida. That's why they played so few games. Ohio State and Oral Roberts. That is the last game in the South. And Ohio State, who lost to Illinois in the Big Ten title game, they still got a 2 seed. And Oral Roberts got a 15 seed, winning the Summit League. But they were not a top seed in that conference. All right, we're going to pause for a moment, and then we'll get to the bottom 2 regionals. We'll talk to Tom, we'll get his thoughts on the rest of this. So we'll be right back here on the live stream, the Daily Insider on VegasInsider.com. And we're back with you here on the Daily Insider. There's Thom Cunningham. We tried to make magic. That's fine. I don't care about 6 feet. It's fine. We tried to make magic by being in another room, but at least he's next to me now. All right, Tom. So let's take a look at the South Regional. All right. Actually, let's go back to the West because your audio cut out. So let's go back to the West.
Okay.
All right, so Gonzaga's the one. That's fine. Okay, we don't need to talk about Gonzaga because we know how good they are. What catches your eye in these matchups in the West?
Yeah, the Missouri versus Oklahoma game, 8-9, is one that catches my eye. Thought Missouri had a chance at the 7th seed because they had the tournament win, but they kind of crumbled near the end of the season. Oklahoma, very similarly, they stumbled the end of the season. So now you have these two teams going head-to-head, and the winner will have to take on Gonzaga in round 2. So that's a very intriguing matchup for two teams that started strong but then struggled as the season went on. Ultimately, they're matched up against each other. Now they have to take on the best team in the country if they get by the other team. So that's very interesting. And then I think Ohio is a sleeper. They do very well in this tournament. They've won 3 of their last 5 NCAA tournament games. They made the Sweet 16 during their last appearance. Virginia also, they're caught napping a few times late into the season. So I think Ohio, and as we all know, Virginia was the first 1 seed that lost to a 16 seed, so they can be upset in round 1. So I think Ohio is a team to watch.
So Virginia and Kansas were 2 teams that lost out on the with the COVID stuff. I think they'll be all right. But I think at least in this West, top heavy, Gonzaga, Virginia, USC, Kansas, Iowa, even Oregon, who lost the Pac-12 title game to Oregon, or they lost in the semifinals rather to Oregon State. That's a lot there. That's top heavy. That I don't think it's easy to say Gonzaga is just going to win that West in a walk.
No, I don't think so either. But let's go down the list. Oklahoma, honestly, they have a pretty good chance of beating Gonzaga, but the struggles that they've had lately, not a ton of conviction there. You go down the list, Creighton and Santa Barbara, I have no conviction either one of them beating Gonzaga. Virginia, Ohio, the same. USC kind of struggled lately as well, but they do have the tools to beat Gonzaga. They rebound the ball very well. They have a ton of length, which I think would cause a ton of difficult shots for those Gonzaga scorers. They have a ton of scorers all over the place in Gonzaga. I have no conviction really in Kansas or Eastern Washington for that matter. Oregon stands out to me as one of the only teams in the West that really could give Gonzaga a run for their money. But I look, through these teams up and down the list, and there is not one team where I would be willing to bet on against Gonzaga coming out of the West region.
Final thought on this region. Anybody that sticks out as far as an upset? Now, the 11, it's Drake and Wichita State, which is going to be a really good game. I mean, App State, Norfolk State's not going to be, no, they're not going to be Gonzaga. But is there a double-digit team that you're looking at? Because, again, the USC game, USC is no slam dunk that, do you think either Drake or Wichita State could take down USC?
Yeah, I do. Both of them could do it. However, I think they're both a little bit, they're advertised better than what they actually are, both Drake and Wichita State. They've been the beneficiaries of a lackluster schedule this season. And when they go up against good teams, Wichita State had the win against Houston. But they struggle more times than not. So I wouldn't say the 11 seed is the one to watch here. I think Eastern Washington, they were picked to win the Big Sky at the beginning of the year. 16-7, that's not a very sexy record. However, they can play, and don't be surprised if they upset Kansas. But again, I think Ohio, of all the double-digit seeds, might be the one that stands out to me. I know a lot of people are high on Santa Barbara. Creighton is a team that can lose in the first round. They don't do well in this tournament. They've kind of skidded into the Big East tournament along with this tournament as well. I'm just not sold on Santa Barbara as much as I am Ohio. Keep in mind, the MAC is a pretty difficult conference, so I would keep your eye on the Bobcats for the West region.
Okay, now let's look at the South, and Baylor's the one. They'll beat Hartford in the first round. Yeah. UNC, Wisconsin. Let's start with that one. And UNC didn't start strong. They finished strong. Wisconsin was the opposite. They were really good to start and then really faded towards the end. Do you think either of these teams has a shot to beat Baylor in the second round?
Yeah, I think they both do. I don't think they will. UNC, what you said, they started slow and then they got better. That's because they're young. So they were learning as the season went on. They didn't have any preseason games. So you had UNC literally learning as they went. And they ended up with an 18-10 record. Wisconsin, I'm actually not going to fade them as much as the whole country seems to be right now. I get why. They're now a 9 seed going against UNC.
That's not a sexy pick. Then if they win, they have to take on presumably Baylor. That's also not a sexy pick. But Wisconsin has possibly more experience than any team in this tournament. And what that tells me is that they are not going to succumb to adversity in games. They've been in a lot of big moments. They know how to handle those moments. So yes, they're 17-12. They've lost a lot more games recently than they've won. But that team is loaded with seniors. They know how to have a short memory. So I like Wisconsin in terms of, okay, we need a timely shot in a big moment. And that's what experience can do. So this is going to be a very interesting matchup. UNC, the youth factor going against Wisconsin, which is basically the experience factor.
Villanova, I thought, at least early on in the season, maybe not a 1, but possibly a 2 seed out of the Big East. And Colin Gillespie gets hurt. They lose to Providence. They lose to Georgetown. Now they're a 5 seed. They play Winthrop, who's a 12. What can you tell us about Winthrop? 23-1 record, won the Big South. What can you tell us about them?
I think that this is actually a matchup that Winthrop would take. As you said, Villanova has lost their best player in Colin Gillespie, so they smell blood in the water. I am not one to say that Winthrop is as good as advertised. Their 23-1 record, again, beneficiaries of a sluggish schedule overall throughout the season. But when you win that many times, and you've done it as recently as 2019, 2020, you become accustomed to it. They're serial winners at this point, regardless of who they're playing. So I think I would be more keen on betting Winthrop as the 12-5 upset rather than Santa Barbara Creighton, for the reasons of Villanova. They're dealing with an injury bug, and Villanova, they've been atrocious away from Finneran Pavilion this year. When they play outside of Pennsylvania, they're horrendous. And so Winthrop, this is a big statement game for them, and I think they're going to bring it. I don't know if they'll win. We'll look at the lines another day and all that, but I do think Villanova is right now of the two that we've looked at more susceptible to an upset than Creighton would be in round 1.
Purdue faces North Texas in that 4-13, and Purdue was good towards the end of the season. North Texas is so interesting that they were tested in non-conference. They took on some teams like they loaded up their schedule. Okay, granted, I think it was Mississippi State and West Virginia, but they still played teams out of conference. And then in Conference USA, they end up beating 2 pretty good teams towards the end, Louisiana Tech and Western Kentucky. They grind it out. They don't give up a lot of points. Purdue, I mean, you look at the Big Ten. The Big Ten had a lot of top seeds. What do you think about North Texas possibly pulling an upset of Purdue?
I'm not huge on it, but I will say Trevion Williams you have to keep an eye on, because if you watch that Ohio State game in the Big Ten tournament, he was dealing with, I believe, some sort of leg injury. And if that lingers, that will be an issue. North Texas, what I liked about them is that they were up against Western Kentucky, then they lost the lead. When you do that against the conference's best team, typically that's a game. That game's over. They battled, and they ended up winning the game in overtime. So I think North Texas is a good 17-9 team. But I've followed the Big Ten all year. I have so much conviction in Jaden Ivey and Trevion Williams and the Purdue players that I won't bet against them in round 1. But I liked Purdue as a Sweet 16 team. Now I'm not so sure because of the injury to Trevion Williams. So keep an eye on his knee and his leg injury entering this matchup. And a week ago I said I liked Purdue. Now I'm thinking about fading them. So we'll see, what happens with that.
And looking at Arkansas, 3 seed, They end up going pretty deep in the SEC tournament. They ended up, they went 12 of 13, I think, towards the end. What do you know about Colgate? I mean, they're 14 seed. 14-1 is not very convincing, but they still won the Patriot League. What can you tell us about Colgate and what they could do against Arkansas?
Well, it's kind of the same story, different chapter with Winthrop. You have a team that are serial winners, basically. Colgate, they have been running the Patriot League. This isn't anything new to them being 14-1 and getting into the tournament. They do this, frequently, more times than not. Arkansas is interesting because, as you know, I was not high on them to begin the year. I've been preaching their cupcake schedule out of conference before they got into the SEC. Then they get into the SEC schedule. They lose to good teams. Then they turn it around and they flip a switch and they're scoring at will. This might be a pretty high-scoring game. History, I was doing some trends research. Arkansas doesn't score a ton of points in the tournament, but now with Musselman, Eric Musselman's there. They average over 80 a game. Colgate can score as well. For this particular game, if you're a little bit weary because you see the 14-1 record for Colgate and you think Arkansas State might be a little bit worse than advertised, I think the point total going over would be one to watch in that game. So again, as the week goes on, we'll see what the lines are. But that's the first game that stands out to me where I think point total before I think winner.
It feels like in that 7-10 game with Florida and Virginia Tech that A, they both had COVID issues, but B, they both stumbled to the finish, that they both weren't very strong. And again, it's hard when you can't have any continuity with the COVID stuff. But Florida, they struggled with Vandy. They lose to Tennessee twice. They lost them at the end of the season. And then in the SEC tournament, they lost at home in Missouri. Virginia Tech ends up losing to North Carolina in the ACC tournament. It's almost like a slug-it-out thing with those two teams. I mean, one of them is going to go to the second round. It's going to have a tough matchup, presumably with Ohio State. But do you think that one of these teams, or who do you think is going to come back and at least get one win before getting to the round of 32?
Yeah, I think I honestly think it would be Virginia Tech. I just think they are the better team of the two. I think they have a better chance of beating Ohio State of the two teams. The thing about Virginia Tech, though, is that they haven't played in a while. They haven't played a lot of games in a while. So you really don't know how they're going to come out. We've seen teams who have been paused by COVID struggle. I think Xavier was probably the biggest victim of that, not having to make the tournament after coming back from COVID and losing a bunch of games. So I would be weary on either of those two teams going far. I think Ohio State is pretty much your safe bet to get to the Sweet 16 out of that part of the bracket. But between the two, I think Virginia Tech would be better suited to beat Ohio State and cause an upset than Florida. Florida's playing without their best player, and they've been doing that all season, but the talent there is still pretty phenomenal, even without Keontae Johnson.
Let's take a look now at the bottom and the East, Michigan, the number one. And before we get to that, I noted this before. Michigan's a 1, Illinois is a 1, Ohio State's a 2, Iowa's a 2. They did well. The Big Ten did well with this. Are you surprised how good or how successful they were with the seedings?
No, not at all. There's no secret that they were the best conference this year. I mean, you see Michigan State, they got in at 15-12. Maryland, what are they, like 16-12, 16-13? And maybe some people will say, well, those records, they don't deserve to be in. But when you're playing Iowa's and Illinois', Ohio State's, Michigan's, Minnesota's every single night, those records are actually pretty impressive. So, no, I'm not surprised at all. It's the best conference.
So Michigan's the 1 in the East, and they end up drawing Mount St. Mary's, Texas Southern, which is, again, I don't think it's going to be any kind of factor there. So let's go further down in this East Regional. And LSU and St. Bonaventure, that one's interesting. Because, I feel like every one of these is interesting. But LSU loses to Alabama in the SEC Championship. They're a team that's had tournament experience and had some fallouts early, but now they still played well towards the end of the year. They won at Missouri. They beat Arkansas. They lose to Alabama. St. Bonaventure won the Atlantic 10, and it seemed like all season they were the best team in the Atlantic 10. So for people that didn't really watch St. Bonaventure, 16-4, what can you say about them against a team from a power conference like LSU?
Well, this is going to be interesting because what you have is essentially one of the best offenses in the nation going up against one of the best defenses in the nation. St. Bonaventure is a very, very good defensive team. LSU averages well over 80 points a game. I believe they're the 15th highest scoring team in the nation this year. So we're going to see which strength of the team is better. Is it LSU's offense or is it St. Bonaventure's defense? St. Bonaventure, I honestly thought VCU was the best team in the A-10 this year. St. Bonaventure proved me wrong. So I'm not ready to write them off, but initial reaction tells me LSU, they should win this game. St. Bonaventure, they've been in the tournament a few times. People usually vie for them as a at-large bid if they don't win their conference tournament. People are like, oh, St. Bonaventure, they got to put them in. They're good enough. So they're going to be, I think, picked a lot as a 9 seed by mass population. I think a lot of people are going to be picking St. Bonaventure. I'm not keen on them just yet. I think LSU's offense is a little bit too much, but that's why they play the game. We'll see what happens. But St. Bonaventure's defense is one of the better ones in this entire tournament.
Georgetown's a 12 seed. They win the Big East tournament, and it seemed like they obviously were not going to go to the tournament unless they won the Big East. But Colorado, out of the Pac-12, they're almost forgotten because they are a team that joined the conference a few years ago, and no one really thinks about what Tad Boyle's done, and he's done a great job with them. They lose to Oregon State in the Pac-12 title game. that are people going to want to take Georgetown because of what they saw in the Big East tournament, and we just don't really focus on Colorado, even though Colorado's a really good team?
Maybe. I do think that this is a bit deceiving in terms of 5-12 matchup. Colorado should win this game. They have a ton of senior experience. They have McKinley Wright, who is the best player for either team on the court. Jeriah Horn, Evan Batty. These are really, really good players for Colorado. And Georgetown, I just want to say they got hot at the right time. They're 13-12 this year. Maybe something, with the Madison Square Garden security. I hate that people were bringing that up. That maybe that fueled fire. Like, okay, give them part of the Big East title then, not instead of the kids playing. But I do think that the Hoyas are, they are capable of winning a few games in this tournament. I mean, if they get by Colorado, right? They play presumably Florida State and or UNC Greensboro. They can win either of those two games, especially if Florida State's turning the ball over 20-plus times like they did against Georgia Tech in the ACC title game. So Georgetown, I don't hate as a 12 pick right now. But Colorado, despite losing to Oregon State beat a bunch of good teams in the tournament. They're a good team this year. I know they're not a sexy team. 17-12, you look through their resume, they got some good wins. But Colorado, there's just too much conviction in McKinley Wright, in Batty, in Horn for me to bet against them, despite the run that Georgetown made.
What about Florida State? That they lose to Notre Dame at the end of the season. They had some COVID stuff, and they lose to Georgia Tech, a good Georgia Tech team in the ACC. And you know what? I mean, can we argue Georgia Tech could have lost to Virginia if they would have played them? Yeah. Maybe, but that's not the point. Georgia Tech still won. UNC Greensboro is out of the Southern Conference. Yeah. They were the best team. We look at some of these teams, Tom, that were 4 or 5 seeds in their conference. They end up being a 12 or a 13. UNC Greensboro was the number 1 seed in the Southern Conference. Yeah. So that's going to be a tough one for FSU.
Yeah, I'm actually not as high on Greensboro this year as I have been in the past when they have made the tournament. They don't shoot the 3-ball like they used to. They used to be one of the better 3-point shooting teams in the nation. That's not the case anymore. The SoCon, to me, is actually one of the more underrated conferences in the entire nation. You have Wofford, you have Furman, you have ETSU, you have UNC Greensboro. So I do give them credit for going out as the number 1 seed and winning what was a very, very tough conference tournament. And not for nothing, but VMI was scoring 80 points per game, it seemed like, this year. So they were running teams. That, I don't want to sell short the accomplishment of what UNC Greensboro has done by winning the SoCon. And they can beat Florida State. As a team as a whole, though, I just have less conviction in them this year than I have in the past, where they also have not won. So the history of this tournament hasn't treated Greensboro well. I don't think they're as good as they've been before when they've made the tournament. So I'm gonna stick with Florida State in this one. But UNC Greensboro winning a very underrated SoCon conference, you do need to consider that if you are picking this matchup in terms of betting.
So BYU's the 6 out of the WCC, and obviously, they lose to Gonzaga, and nobody's beaten Gonzaga this season. But the 11 game is Michigan State, or 11 versus 11, Michigan State and UCLA. So two teams that would play in the Elite 8 normally, or the Sweet 16, are playing in the on the first night in the first 4. We know what Michigan State did up and down most of the season, and they got some good wins towards the end. We talked about how good the Big Ten was. But what about UCLA? That they had that heartbreaking loss to USC at home at the end. They weren't good ATS most of the way. That I don't know. I mean, can UCLA make any kind of run? Or because, again, whoever wins that game definitely has got a shot to beat BYU.
Yeah, I think either of these teams can make a run. They go to BYU. The winner will go there. Either of those teams can beat BYU. Then presumably you would take on Texas, maybe Alabama after that. Road obviously gets tougher. I don't see either team going on a huge run. They could probably get by BYU, and then that would be it. Sweet 16 would be, I think, reaching their high point of this tournament. The thing with UCLA is they've been bitten by the injury bug all year. They lost their star Smith early, so Mick Cronin had to make a ton of adjustments almost immediately when the season started. Recently, they lost, Jalen Hill? So they're down a big man. Cody Riley has had to step up in his place. He got in foul trouble in the Pac-12 tournament game. But they've got depth, UCLA. You've got Jacquez, who's an underrated scorer. You got Johnny Juzang, who has come out of nowhere, has just dominated recently, 14 points per game. And then you have Tiger Campbell, who's basically quarterbacking the whole show. So they have pieces in place. And I trust them more than Michigan State. Michigan State was basically playing off of pure emotion and Joshua Langford's will to just get them into the tournament, they might be out of energy, and I think that showed against Maryland in the Big Ten tournament.
Alabama faces Iona, and the only reason why we're really talking about this is because you have two well-dressed men on the sidelines. You have Nate Oates for Alabama, who's really made this Crimson Tide program into a powerhouse. You have Rick Pitino with Iona, and I know we haven't seen much of Iona because the Metro really had a lot of COVID issues this year. I mean, you see the record, 12-5 for Iona, and they win the MAC. Is there any shot that Iona? No, simple as that. I mean, Alabama, they could score at will, and they're going to be a fun team to watch. I mean, if you get that 1-2 in the Elite Eight of Michigan, Alabama is going to be a great game. But speaking of Alabama, assuming they don't lose to Iona, can UConn or Maryland knock them off, or is that just asking too much?
No, I think, what UConn has, I would give UConn more of a benefit of the doubt than Maryland because they have James Bouknight. He is a player much like what we've seen in this tournament in the past. We've talked about this. Dwayne Wade at Marquette, Steph Curry at Davidson, Kemba at UConn. That's the same thing we're dealing with here at James Bouknight. I think they will beat Maryland. Maryland's a good team. Keep in mind, they play great defense. Their defense is top 30 in the nation, which I don't know if a lot of people know that. It's one of the best out there, and that is going to be something in this tournament to watch. And you saw what Maryland was able to do with that defense late in the season. They actually rattled off a bunch of key wins. And they played Michigan pretty well until Juwan Howard exploded and Michigan ran away with the game. Maryland was right there with them the whole time. So either team can beat Alabama, I think. Maryland would have to do it with the defense, and that has not worked well for teams this year. Usually if you're going to beat Alabama, you have to score a minimum 75 points. Maryland just can't do that. UConn, they can score, but Bouknight is going to have to score minimum 23 points per game for UConn to keep advancing. So this, honestly, I would say is Bouknight's tournament to go out there and win or lose because he is that type of player that can rattle off 4 or 5 straight wins for his team and just take over any given game.
The Midwest. Let's wrap up with the Midwest.
Yeah.
And Illinois is the one, not surprising. I know, right? Illinois is the one. They played Drexel, and Drexel was, the 4 or the 5 seed in the Colonial, and they beat Elon. So that's a hard one. You don't normally see a team from the Colonial as a 16 seed, but, anyway. So you can't tell me, Tom, and people have, it's been discussed for years, and I've always been into this conspiracy theory. You want to see Bob Knight face Indiana, when he was at Texas Tech, or you want to have that potential in the second round. You want to have these things in the second round. Don't tell me it's an accident Illinois could play Loyola Chicago in the second round. Don't tell me that. That is not an accident. You could put Loyola Chicago in any other region as an 8 seed, but that's a really good team. They've been to the Final Four. They have Sister Jean. They are, again,
champions.
Yeah, and they are, it's not a walkover. I'm not going to say that they're automatically beating Georgia Tech, but the potential of Loyola Chicago against Illinois is very intriguing.
No, that's not automatic. They're beating Georgia Tech. What's interesting is Loyola Chicago is the best defense in the nation. They give up the fewest amount of points per game, if that's what you're using as your measuring tool. Georgia Tech has the defensive player of the year in the ACC in Jose Alvarado. So you're going to be, I would assume, seeing a lot of turnovers in this game, a lot of difficult shots. Much like the Arkansas game we discussed, I think a point total stands out here. Now, Georgia Tech scores points at will, but when you're dealing with the number one defense in the nation, and you have a guy like Alvarado who's going around, he got 4 steals against FSU alone. I think you're going to see a point total go under here. We'll see what the given line is later in the week, but that is one that stands out to me that says, okay, that probably should go under. Loyola Chicago or Georgia Tech can take off, though, because they are that good. And what's funny about the Loyola-Georgia Tech matchup is that most of the nation, I don't think, realize how good these teams are. The fact that they're seeded 8-9, they could be higher. These are teams that are good enough to be 4, 5, and 6 seeds in this tournament.
You don't normally see an ACC tournament champion as a 9 seed,
right.
But here's another one, too, and I guess we compare seedings that Colorado was a 5 against Georgetown was a 12. You're telling me Colorado and Tennessee are on the same level? I just can't buy that because Tennessee...
Who do you have higher?
Colorado.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, that Colorado, I think, is higher, but then when you look at Georgetown against Oregon State, it felt like Oregon State maybe was better than Georgetown was this year. Oregon State won at Oregon earlier in the season. They beat them again in the Pac-12 tournament. Yeah. But, this one, again, people I think want to root for Oregon State because they're the Beavers and they won the Pac-12. And really Tennessee just, had a good start, but really was unimpressive during SEC play.
Yeah, they really fell off there at the end. And what you mentioned was you thought Colorado was better than Tennessee. You would say Oregon's better than Georgetown, correct?
Oregon State, yeah.
Or Oregon State, I'm sorry. Yeah, so of the two, I would say Colorado got the better draw there. Oregon State, to me, and if you went on VegasInsider.com and you read any of our tournament previews, our long shot pick for the Pac-12 tournament was Oregon State. And so, I really think that they could beat Tennessee. Oregon State, they're 17-12, and I touched on this earlier. They're not an incredibly sexy pick to the public because it's Oregon State. They have no history in this event. They got in. They stole a bid. A lot of people will say, I'm one that says their resume should have been looked at. You mentioned how good they were against their in-state rival, Oregon, who could be the best team in the Pac-12. Right. Two players stand out for Oregon State. Maybe three if you count Wendell Moore. You have Jared Lucas, who is a terrific three-point shooter. He can make almost any shot beyond the arc. And Ethan Thompson. And we mentioned this in the Pac-12 tournament preview. Those two can, if they get hot, they are as good as any pair in the country. Not just the Pac-12, not the whole country. They can each score over 20 points a game. So I would look out for Oregon State in terms of a potential 12-5 upset. And Oregon State, if you remember, Oregon won the Pac-12 in 2019. Then they went on a good run in the tournament when a lot of people didn't think they would even get in. It could be something similar here with the Beavers.
San Diego State and Syracuse. I want to skip down to that game in the 6-11 in the Midwest. Now, I dug this one up, Tom, so I'm going to take credit for it. And I know you did a great job with all the conference stuff this past week with the tournament. It was, but this one I dug up, and I'm hoping this works out again. That the winner of the Mountain West tournament, the last 7 years, obviously taken out last year because Utah State didn't play in the tournament for COVID. The last 7 Mountain West tournament champions lost in the first round of the tournament.
Yeah.
So they get Syracuse, who
Interesting.
Obviously has been there. They're not facing a team that you're like, oh, well, what? I mean, Syracuse can, I'm going to say easily beat them, but Syracuse has an opportunity to win this game. We know Syracuse had Virginia at the end, and they lost in that three-pointer, but it's Boeheim, it's March. Syracuse can definitely make that run because we're expecting nothing from them.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I mean, I get San Diego State's lost 4 games this year. I just have not been – this is not the same 30-win team a year ago. When you look at what San Diego State did last year, they were going to be a number 1 seed in the tournament. And I think when you look at San Diego State and you say, what was their record? What seed are they? 6?
23-4.
They're 23-4. Okay, so you look at the 23-4 and you go, okay, this is somewhat similar to the team that won 30 games. They should win. That's not the case. They've also lost, I want to say, 4 or 5 or 3 of their last 4 NCAA tournament games in general. San Diego State, so they don't do particularly well in this tournament. I think Syracuse is a fine pick here. San Diego State, they lean on their defense. Their offense, they don't have the offense they had a year ago. Jordan Shackle, he's trying to carry his weight on the team, but it's going to be tough for them. Let's just say that the 23-4 record and the 6th seeding is not. Don't ride home with that for the Aztecs. There's a lot more to not like about this team. I would say the offensive struggles are real. Their strength of schedule wasn't quite there. But then you look to the other side of that and you say Syracuse might not even deserve to get in. So it should be an interesting matchup, but I would not ride home on San Diego State by any means in this one.
All right. We're going to look now at, I'm going to pull this up, and hold on one second. Let's pull this up. We're going to look at not the auto, but let's see. Hold on one second. It's coming. Hold on. We're gonna pull up the odds for the tournament that have just come out.
Perfect.
And let's see if we can get this up here. Hold on one second. Gotta tell whoever's in there to get out of it. There we go. Hold on a second, everyone. I see who won that race. I don't know who ended up winning that race today in Arizona. So here, let's look at this. Let's look at college basketball. That's where we're gonna go now. We're at the Don Best screen. I swear I'm going to break my computer before the night is done.
There we go.
Okay, let's see.
We got a few days before the first game.
Yeah, make sure this works before Thursday. All right, so let's take a look now at some of the lines that have populated. All right, here we go. First four, Tom, and I know we can't really expand the screen, so we're going to read it to you. Right. Norfolk State, Appalachian State laying 2.5, total of 134.5 at Westgate. Drake and Wichita State laying 2. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not. The odds makers really like Wichita State. I mean, of the two, I think Wichita State's a better team. I'd say Drake, the strength of schedule. I mean, we were talking about this before we came on, me and another coworker. Of the 25 wins they have, 24 are not that impressive. Right. So I would give Wichita the 2-point benefit of the doubt on that one.
Mount St. Mary's and Texas Southern laying 2. We're not going to talk about that because nobody knows about that game. UCLA and Michigan State, that right now at a pick'em at Westgate. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. What's the point total there? 137.5. Ooh, that could go either way. Well, UCLA has been better on the spread than Michigan State. Michigan State has been pretty atrocious against the spread this season, despite the success they had at the end of the year. But that game against Maryland in the Big Ten tournament, Maryland was favored by a few points. They ended up covering substantially, and that's been Michigan State all year. So I would lean more towards UCLA and go with what Michigan State has been doing all year, which was failing to cover the spread.
All right, so let's look at Friday now. Obviously, the tournament starts Thursday with the first four, and then Friday is the NCAA tournament. So, and again, they're all playing in Indianapolis, so the sites really don't matter, and we're going to find out the times, the TV stuff in a little bit. All right, let's go through the rundown here. Baylor laying 26 to Hartford. I would just stay away from that game. Wisconsin and North Carolina, the Tar Heels laying 2, total of 138.5. Your early thoughts on that?
They should be able to do that. I like the under, though, for that. Both teams tend to go under more times than not. I see you have 142.5. If I saw that point total, I would take that and go under in a heartbeat.
Winthrop at Villanova. I like how the public is already wanting to pound Winthrop, but Villanova laying 6.5. And again, it's just hard to forget, A, with Gillespie out, but B, that, like you said, Villanova, they had some struggles away from home, and losing to Providence in a low-scoring game, losing to Georgetown, who was not going to be a tournament team, and they got blown out by St. John's. I mean, they had some losses to teams that are not going to the tournament.
Yeah, and once again, another point total stands out here. I think this is with circa 136.5. That should go over. I also think Winthrop should cover this game. This should be a close one. I do think Villanova will win. They are the better team. Even without Gillespie, they are the better team. But I do believe that Winthrop should cover, and I think that point total going over is a pretty safe bet as well.
And Villanova also lost to Butler. I mean, so they had some losses. Team. I mean,
away from Finner and Pavilion, they cannot be trusted this year, and they've proven it multiple times. So I can see why the public is going after Winthrop right now.
North Texas and Purdue. Purdue is an 8-point favorite. Total of 126.5. Yeah. Utah State, Texas Tech. We didn't hit on that one when we talked about the brackets, but Texas Tech laying 4.5 there. Utah State was the second team coming out of the Mountain West that you wouldn't think the Mountain West would get another team besides San Diego State. So Utah State kind of interesting there as an underdog.
Yeah, and I mean, Circa, I don't know what it is with Circa, but their point totals I'm really loving right now, 134.5. I'd probably go under with that. You have two defensive-minded teams that tend to go under. I believe they limit opponents to roughly 65, 64 points per game. That just seems like a really kind point total line right there. Of the two, in terms of winning, Texas Tech should win, and they should cover that. Utah State, congratulations on getting in. Much like San Diego State, though, they're a little bit inconsistent and lack conviction in terms of the strength of opponents that they've played this year.
The highest total on Friday by far is Colgate and Arkansas, of 157.5, and Arkansas laying 9.5 in that one against Colgate, who we said, look, they didn't play that many games this year, and Arkansas has the potential to run them. But again, Arkansas, on the flip side, Tom, this is not a team that's been in the tournament a lot. I mean, you think of Arkansas as Nolan Richardson, like you go back 20-something years, but right now, there's not a lot of experience as far as in the tournament with Arkansas.
No, they don't have experience, but they have the talent. And Moses Moody is one of the most talented freshmen in the country, and that's what Arkansas has. It's funny, though, because the Colgate-Arkansas game when we were going over, that was the first game that the point total stood out to me before we even saw any of the odds. I was like, oh, that game should go over. Look what they set it at, 157.5 with Westgate. So they backed my thought in that this will be a high-scoring game, and that's what it's looking like based off of the point total given.
Florida, a 1.5 point favorite against Virginia Tech. Ohio State laying 17 to Oral Roberts. That total 154.5. So, and Oral Roberts out of the Summit League, they run and gun it a lot. Yeah. Let's look at this other regional. Drexel, Illinois laying 22. I just stay away from all those top seeds. I mean, I don't know how much you accomplish by trying to take that game. Georgia Tech and Loyola Chicago. And Loyola Chicago laying 2.5 in that one. Again, it shows a lot of respect for this team that has been to the Final Four, and Georgia Tech, they haven't been in the tournament in a while, with Josh Pastner. And like I said, that they beat Florida State, which was a really good win. They beat Miami, who was undermanned, and they avoided Virginia. So really, what have the Yellow Jackets proven so far? That's the question.
They have a good offense, and they have experience, too. There's a ton of seniors on this team, between Alvarado, and then we haven't even gotten to the ACC Player of the Year in Moses Wright yet. I like Georgia Tech. This is a very interesting game to me. This is going to be one of the better matchups in round one is Georgia Tech, Loyola Chicago. It's very difficult to pick this matchup. Again, I see 132.5 with Circa Sports. Should go under. I am willing to bet in this game on Loyola Chicago's defense over everything else. And so starting with that, I would go with the point total going under as my top bet. I mean, even you see a pick'em here. You see, Tech by 2. It's going to be too close in terms of picking a winner. I think you go with Loyola Chicago's defense.
Oregon State getting 8.5 against Tennessee. Liberty getting 9.5 against Oklahoma State. We didn't hit on that one. Oklahoma State with your cousin, Cade Cunningham. Oklahoma State did a great job in that Big 12 tournament. They beat West Virginia. They beat Baylor. They had a lot of good wins during the season. Is that a little rich there, laying 9.5 against Liberty?
No, I don't think. Liberty's not that good. They are not the same team that upset Mississippi State in the tournament already. They're not as good as they were. I think Oklahoma State, quite frankly, is a dark horse to make a very deep run in this tournament. I thought that they were going to beat Texas in the Big 12 title game. Between Cade Cunningham, the momentum that Oklahoma State has right now might be some of the best in the entire country. I would ride the Cowboys right now just because they have the best player in the country and they have a lot of momentum right now. I'm not keen on Liberty. I just don't think they're as good as they were the year that they beat Mississippi State.
What did I say about Syracuse and San Diego State? The Aztecs just a 1.5, 2-point favorite against Syracuse. So keep an eye on that one. Morehead State getting 12 against West Virginia.
Yeah, you hate this trend, but Morehead State has won, I believe it's 5 of their last 7. So watch out for that.
And when were one of those wins?
2011.
But before 2011, go way back in the time machine.
It's a few decades, but if you're looking for let's just leave it. Let's leave it like this. No one's expecting Morehead State to win. So if we throw it out there now and they hit, we'll look good, right? So we'll just say keep an eye on Morehead State, West Virginia, in terms of one of those games that will bust your brackets, presumably, much like a 16 over a 1 seed. Really just any game where you are not expecting a team to win at all. A Georgia State over Baylor. Any of those sorts of games. Morehead State, West Virginia, just keep an eye out on it. That's all we're saying. We're not saying just circle it and be wary of it. That's all I'm going to say.
Rutgers and Clemson we didn't hit on. Rutgers, congratulations getting to the tournament. I feel like Clemson just struggled towards the end. And
away from home.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of faith in Brad Brownell in a big spot.
Well, their offense is sluggish, and that's being kind. They have one player that can score consistently, and that's it. That's the problem with Clemson. You saw it in the ACC tournament against Miami. If they can't score, they're done. And they can't score a lot. So you can only rely on your defense. You can only pull Tony Bennett so much. You can only rely on your defense for so long. Eventually, if you don't have point scorers, it will catch up to you. And with Clemson, it has already.
Now let's look at Houston laying 19.5 to Cleveland State, who won the Horizon League. Let's look at Saturday really quick. And Gonzaga, obviously, they're waiting for their opponent. Missouri and Oklahoma, Sooners laying 2. I don't have faith in Oklahoma. I think it's 0-6 ATS. You have faith in Oklahoma?
No, I don't really have faith in Missouri, though, either. This is a faithless game, you could say. Missouri does tend to cover the spread a little bit better, but it is quite a toss-up. I believe Oklahoma goes under more times than not, and Missouri goes over, so the point total also has almost no conviction in it. I'm with you, though. You have really no faith in either of these teams, especially Oklahoma, for the way they've struggled. They now have 10 losses on the year. That seemed like it would be an anomaly if they got 10 losses about a month ago. Now we're sitting here and they have 10 losses. Maybe it'll fuel them. I don't know. They know that they're better than this, though. I think we all know Oklahoma is better than they're playing. Missouri, I can't say the same for. So, I don't trust either team, but of the two, I would lean with the Sooners.
And with Missouri, again, try to figure them out. They won at Arkansas. They won at Tennessee. Yeah. They beat Oregon in non-conference, but they've lost to Ole Miss twice. Yeah. They lost to Georgia. You kind of won. They struggled against Georgia in the SEC tournament. So that's the issue with Missouri. You don't really know which team you're going to get. Right. All right, Cal, Santa Barbara, and Creighton. Creighton laying 8, total of 140.5. Ohio and Virginia. Virginia laying 10.5, total of 132.5. Wow. And what's the wow?
The wow is the 10.5. I mean, I understand it's Virginia and Ohio. So on paper, you think double-digit point spread. It should not be. Ohio can score. They are very capable of scoring. And the conundrum with Virginia is they play no offense and they play only defense. That's actually not the case this year. Now, they don't give up a ton of points, but their efficiency rating is top 25 on offense in the country. So their offense is efficient. They control the game so much that they just don't take a bunch of shots. They just wind the clock down when they have the control of the ball. So what I see with 10.5 is I just find it baffling that a team that scores as much as Ohio and Virginia, who slows the tempo down tremendously and at an efficient rate, a top 25 rate in the country, you're going to see a high-scoring team in Ohio versus a slow-moving team in Virginia. That should keep the point total closer than 10.5. So I see the 10.5 for Ohio, and you know I'm high on Ohio already. No. That's just one that, wow, they really reached, and they went with a double-digit point spread on that. I think 8.5, 9 may have been a little bit more fair. 10.5, you're talking about 11 points. It might hit, but that's ballsy for the odds makers there. That's courageous, I would say.
And Virginia struggled against the spread towards the end of the season, so you kind of wonder now, again, a big number they're laying that's kind of curious. USC waiting for their opponent, Eastern Washington and Kansas. Kansas laying 11. That number you see has dropped down. Circa opened up at 13, and it's dropped down to 11, so that's kind of interesting. VCU and Oregon. And we talked about Oregon as, probably the best team in the Pac-12 potentially, but they opened 6 at Circa, and now that number's dropped to 5, and even 4.5 at Station. So some respect coming out of VCU.
Yeah, VCU plays very, very good defense. So I'm wondering if that might be why the point total is dropping. Oregon should win that game, but 6 and 5.5 becomes a bit worrisome when you're talking about how good of a defense Virginia Commonwealth actually has. And the point total, that's very dangerous. 138.5, 137, 139. It's going to be right around that territory because Oregon typically goes over the point total more times than they don't. But again, Virginia Commonwealth, that defense is very stingy, very stout. They really don't allow over 65 points a game. I believe St. Bonaventure in the A-10 title game, they gave up 64, and St. Bonaventure ended up winning that game. So I think this is going to be a very tricky game with the given lines for the spread and the point total market. But Oregon should win. They should win that game.
Iowa's laying 15 to Grand Canyon, total of 144. Michigan's waiting for their opponent. LSU and St. Bonaventure, basically a pick'em there. And LSU, I don't know if they put everything out there against Arkansas and Alabama, and now you get St. Bonaventure, the champion of the Atlantic 10. So you kind of wonder, does LSU have an early exit here?
They could. It's tough to say. I'll have to do a little bit more digging into this game. Again, though, you have one of the best offenses in the nation going against one of the best defenses in the nation. Pure talent standpoint, LSU is the better team. LSU, it's funny because a week ago you asked me about LSU, and I said, well, I just don't think that they've had the quality opponents to make a deep run in this tournament. The SEC tournament proved me wrong. They did exactly what my main concerns were. And the only huge standout for LSU in terms of a weakness is they don't play at the rim on defense. They don't guard the rim well on defense. That's not some strength St. Bonaventure can lay all their eggs in that basket. So I think LSU is fine for now, but this is not going to be a game where LSU is used to scoring 80-plus points because of how good St. Bonaventure's defense is. LSU is going to have to win this game, possibly scoring no more than 71, 72 points.
Georgetown and Colorado. Buffalo's a 5.5-point favorite, total of 138.5. And again, like we talked about before, is this one of the blowouts that we are not expecting because Georgetown, people will look at Ewing and they won the Big East, but in all honesty, and I don't want to dog on Georgetown, but let's just break it down what they did in the Big East tournament. You like that, don't you? The dog, you like that. I come up with them very, very infrequently, so I had to get that one. So let's look at Georgetown.
Yeah.
They beat a very inconsistent Marquette team who was terrible in the first half in the Big East tournament. They beat Villanova, who is down their best player. They beat Seton Hall, who was awful towards the end and probably should have lost to St. John's.
Right.
And they beat a Creighton team who they had problems with the head coach, with the comments he made. And
Distractions all over the program.
It seemed like a little dissension there.
Yeah.
I'm not taking away from what they did, okay, because they dominated some of those games. But just looking at that, the stars kind of aligned for Georgetown, I feel like, in that Big East tournament.
Oh, for that tournament.
Yeah. The stars aligned for them.
Not
Things
for
worked
the
out.
March one, though. I just don't know. I really feel that a lot of people like to fall in love with Cinderellas this time of the year. The truth of the matter, okay, they happen. You have your 16s over 1s. You have your VCUs into the Final Fours.
1-16 over 1.
Yeah,
one bad matchup
right.
for Virginia.
Exactly.
Who can't score.
And so, like, people automatically in the brackets come out, they go, where's the 12-5 upset? Where's my 13-4 upset? The truth of the matter is you're not really trying to look for upsets because they don't happen a lot. They do happen, but more times than not, you want to play the odds, and the odds are the better team wins. So don't fall in love with a bunch of underdogs. If there's one or two you're very keen on, that's fine, but don't start picking, two 12s, a 13, a 14. Like, that just doesn't happen. Although you might hear about it on TV, and it's like, oh, who's Cinderella? Who's the sexy, sleeper pick this year? Be smart. Bring it down to earth a little bit and take it one game at a time. I don't think it's smart to go all in on underdogs. Georgetown, although they are Georgetown and they have the name that comes with the prestige of George, they are an underdog. They're 13-12 for a reason. Colorado is one of the best teams in the nation. Don't go falling in love with Ewing's run and this Big East run. It's intriguing. 12-5 matchup. They just had a big run going against Colorado, who just lost. But the truth of the matter is these upsets don't happen a lot. So don't fall in love with it. Stay the course, and yeah, I wouldn't go all in on underdogs. Georgetown fits the underdog bill, so just be wary. I still like Colorado. Don't expect a big run from the Hoyas in this one.
Quick thought on this. I'm just kind of popping my head. Better conference this year, the Big East or the Pac-12?
Pac-12.
Okay.
I think the Pac-12 is actually one of the better conferences of the year. It doesn't get any respect. You're going to have 5 teams in this tournament now when we were talking about 4. Oregon State steals a bid. Stanford was good for most of the season. They lost their best player, missed the tournament. If Oscar De Silva stays healthy at Stanford, they're probably getting in March Madness. Pac-12 is better. It is probably a top 5, top 4 conference in the nation this year.
Big East got what? 3: Villanova, Creighton, and Georgetown, and that's
UConn. 4.
UConn.
So
we forget UConn's in the Big East.
So Pac-12 had more. I mean,
right. And look, we could cancel out Oregon State and Georgetown as saying they probably would not have gotten in, obviously.
Well, Seton Hall blew it. St. John's lost too many games early in the year, although they were, I thought, a bubble team when a lot of people didn't even have them on the bubble. St. John's was there. They blew it, and Xavier blew it. So the Big East had opportunities to claim themselves a good conference, and they just didn't take advantage of them.
Right, and you forget, I mean, not saying you forget, but UConn was the American. They were the Big East for so long, went to the American, and then now they're back in the Big East. All right, so where are we? Georgetown, Colorado, UNC Greensboro, FSU, Florida State laying 10.5 there.
I'll take that.
You take the points with UNC Greensboro?
I'm just not high on Greensboro. Again, they're not.
No, so you're taking the points with Greensboro or lay the points with FSU?
No, I'm going with FSU to cover that because I just don't think Greensboro can handle FSU's scoring ability. Maybe if this was Greensboro a few years ago, where they were a top 30 team from beyond the arc in the country, they're not that team anymore. They're much more defensive minded. So I think Florida State will just end up taking advantage and run away at some point.
BYU waiting for their opponent. It's either Michigan State or UCLA. And then these last 3, Texas and Abilene Christian. We haven't really hit on Abilene Christian. I don't know why we have it from the Southland Conference. But Texas, I mean, you got 2 Texas schools there hooking up. But what do you think about Texas? They, I felt, were very up and down towards the end. They avoid Kansas in the Big 12 tournament because of the COVID stuff with the Jayhawks. But beating Oklahoma State was a good win. They beat Texas Tech. They had a couple quality wins there in the Big 12.
Yeah, and looking at the bracket right now in front of me, I do believe that if Kansas did beat Texas, Texas would not have a 3 seed. I think they'd be a 4 seed. They'd probably be where FSU is quite frankly. They should be fine against Abilene Christian. Abilene Christian, though, they fall into the Winthrop categories. They fall into the Colgates, where they don't play a ton of tough competition, but what they do is they win, and they're serial winners. They're used to winning. But Texas is too much. I will say also, though, when you get two schools going head-to-head, and it is an interstate matchup, so you have, let's say, a good example would be a Syracuse versus a Colgate. You have a top team in New York going up against a small school in New York. Well, you have the same thing here for Texas. And the reason those games are closer is because most of those kids play each other growing up. They stay in state, and they just kind of spread out.
Right.
So when you have a top team in a state going against a smaller school in the state, those are a little bit more susceptible to upsets. That's one of the reasons I would look at Abilene Christian, but I'm telling you right now, going back to the underdog theory I just rambled on for about, go with Texas. Don't overthink this. They are the better team. The point spread, it's a bit high, 9.5, 10. I don't know about that, but yeah, in terms of an upset, I don't see Abilene Christian doing anything. Although the interstate matchups, as I just mentioned, tend to be a little bit closer than what people do think.
And obviously for Abilene Christian, them being in the tournament's a big deal, but if they played Creighton, they played someone else, it'd be like, all right, but you're playing Texas, like that's a big deal. Like you're playing the big dog in the state. They have their own network. I mean, you're playing that.
You could steal some recruits away from that game if you end up winning. You never know. It's a big one.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I mean, and Texas again was not the best team in the Big 12. I mean, by far. I mean, you could have said they were the fourth or fifth best team possibly in the Big 12 this year. Let's look at Maryland and UConn. We didn't talk about this game earlier, and UConn laying 2.5. Maryland was so up and down this year.
Yeah.
They had some great road wins, had some questionable losses. UConn back in the Big East. They performed pretty well. They struggled against Creighton. They went 0-3 against Creighton, though. They struggled against Villanova. So against the big dogs, that's why I wonder with Connecticut, that they beat up a lot of the teams they should have in the Big East, but really didn't do well against the upper tier teams.
Yeah, and again, it is Bo Knight. It's what can he do? And a good comparison here is Tracy Jackson Davis with Indiana. Now, Indiana didn't get into this tournament, obviously, but that team goes as far as he takes them. This is the same situation with UConn. They're going to go as far as Bo Knight takes them. So if he puts up 27 points, if he starts averaging 25 points, 23 points a game in this tournament, they might go on a nice little run here. Maryland, you mentioned, which I found interesting, about winning early good road games. So I do have conviction in Maryland playing this tournament in a different state than Maryland. Then they play good defense. As we mentioned, they're top 30 in the nation, which kind of goes under the radar. When you break down Maryland, you don't think of them as being an elite defensive team, which they are. So this is going to be a fun matchup. This is going to be all of Maryland game planning around Bo Knight. That's all this game is going to be. So this will be Maryland's top 30 defense against one of the best players in the country in Bo Knight.
Let's take a quick look before we end the show at some future odds that were just updated. And Gonzaga 2-1, Baylor, Michigan 6-1, Illinois the lowest one seed at 7-1. Who sticks out there? Not the top four, but this middle range: Houston, Bama, Oklahoma State, Connecticut. Who sticks out to you?
So my advice with futures betting in March Madness is figure out what you're betting, and what I mean by that is office pool or futures. If you're doing an office pool, you want to pick a team that no one else is picking for obvious reasons. If you get to the finals and you and 6 other people have the same team, it does you no good. You got to take a risk,
especially a silly point total.
Right, yeah. Especially with this tournament. This would be, of all the sports tournaments, the one to pick the random shot in the dark, whatever. So in that regard, I like Houston. They have one of the best efficiency ratios from offense to defense in the nation. I believe they have like the 5th most efficient offense and the 2nd most efficient defense. That ratio tends to win titles in this tournament. Virginia had the best one in 2019. They ended up winning the whole thing. So Houston would be, I think, for office pools, an intriguing pick. If you're just picking a winner off this page, right, to place a futures bet, and you're not entering brackets or anything, I'm picking one winner to win this whole thing. I'm taking Gonzaga. They are the best team in the country. You're getting them at plus value. There's no middle team to me that stands out. I guess Oklahoma State, but their value, you could have gotten them for what UCLA is at 7,500 right now. I just don't like the value of Oklahoma State compared to what it was even a week or a week and a half ago. People are punching Oklahoma State right now, and they're going on Cade Cunningham. So I liked that until it became popular. So now I got to find another one. So I'm telling you, though, futures. There's no reason to not like Gonzaga. But if you're picking an office pool and you're doing brackets and you're submitting brackets, Houston, to me, would be the team I would consider going very far in your office pool.
Now I want to back up my point once more with Georgetown. You see Georgetown at 200-1?
Yeah.
Look who's in their neighborhood here. UC Santa Barbara. Hartford was a 16 seed. Grand Canyon was a 15 seed. Winthrop. So schools like that, Cleveland State are in the 200-1 range. That's a little scary to me that Georgetown is there. That's why I say, wow, laying 4.5 by with Colorado. I'm not going to call that the lock of the first round, but man,
Colorado, they cover.
I'm saying Colorado.
Well. Colorado cover. They've got 3 seniors.
I know.
McKinley Wright
I know.
Is one of the best players ever in the Pac-12. Ever.
It's like tell me what I'm missing here with Colorado.
Exactly. Well, they are a bit inconsistent. But the thing with Colorado is they just came off a loss. They don't lose 2 games in a row.
Right.
I believe the trend is they've won 8 straight games after losing the game prior.
Yeah.
They are not going to take that Oregon State loss lightly. And they call Evan Batty the mayor of Boulder for a reason. And that's like the best nickname for him. He just bully balls down there, takes over games in the paint. There's a lot to like about Colorado, and I'm with you, man. You see 5.5, 6, I'd take the Buffs. I would.
Yeah.
They ran to a buzzsaw with the Beavers. That's all, They were on their way to a Pac-12 title until Ethan Thompson and Jared Lucas came to town. So. And
Colorado had beaten USC in 3 games before they faced Oregon State, who they beat twice and then lost to the third time. So
Oregon State, they're just on a roll. They're better. They are better than people want to give them credit for because they are Oregon State. They don't think of Oregon State, you see Syracuse getting in with 9 losses. Oregon State, they're never getting in with 9 losses at a large bid. But 17-12 this year, that record is not bad. Then you dig deep into their schedule. They belong here. I think they belong here for sure.
So, lot to digest. Tomorrow we'll have the Daily Insider once again. We'll break down more of this as well. And best of luck with your bets. I mean, so much going on, and your office pools. I mean, look, no one had Loyola Chicago years ago. No one had George Mason. No one had VCU. No one had some of these teams. So you got to find that one. Who's going to be the one who's going to be that 10, 11, 12 seed that can make a run to the Final Four?
Morehead said, no, I'm just kidding. I know you don't want to hear that. No. Honestly, looking at it, I like Oregon State. They're a 12 seed. And we've talked a lot about them today, which I don't think anyone in the world would have expected that we'd be talking about Oregon State on Selection Sunday as much as we are. But they take on Tennessee. If they can get past Jaden Springer and that hit or miss offense, keep in mind John Fulkerson is out for Tennessee. Their big man. He broke his nose or his face or whatever, so he's out. If they can take advantage of that game, then they possibly take on Cade Cunningham and Oklahoma State. Watch out for Liberty as well. There just seems to be a lot of uncertainty in that bottom right corner of the bracket. Syracuse, San Diego State. There's going to be a lot of X's on people's brackets on the bottom right. I have a feeling just looking at all this.
I feel like the Midwest is not as strong. I feel like the Midwest is more ripe for an upset, where in the West, Gonzaga, USC, Creighton, Virginia, Iowa, Kansas, Oregon, that's a lot there. Where I feel like in the Midwest, Illinois, do you trust Tennessee? Do you trust Oklahoma State? Do you trust San Diego State? West Virginia, it could be a little up and down.
Oklahoma
Houston.
State, I trust, but that's it. West Virginia, if they can get past Morehead in the first round, I know that sounds crazy, but if they can get past Morehead State in the first round, they should be fine. But Houston. That in the Midwest, I like Houston, and watch for Illinois. They've got to play Loyola or Georgia Tech in round 2, then possibly Cade Cunningham in the Sweet 16. That's not an easy path. So I really think Houston, a lot of people need to circle right now. They got good efficiency ratios on offense and defense. Clemson and Rutgers, they're kind of sluggish. Yeah. So there's not a lot of conviction in that side of the bracket, but I like Houston. Houston.
Well, we'll see what Houston does. I mean, winning the American, we know they're the best team in the American, but what can they do against some other power teams is interesting. So, all right, so that's what we have here. Go to vegasinsider.com. You can check out the future odds, which you're looking at now. You can find the brackets also on the homepage. There's our YouTube right there, and that's us. So if you go to the viewable brackets and odds, you click on that, you can check out all of the matchups here. So go to that, bookmark that, and we'll have plenty of content, plenty of previews throughout the week, and just something to keep an eye on. So that's what we got here. So for Thom Cunningham, I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you again on Monday for the Daily Insider right here on vegasinsider.com. Yeah, that hand, right?
Yeah.